question. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Florida is recognized. Gentleman from the ranking member is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I have 3 unanimous consent requests.
All right.
First, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the publisher's webpage for President Biden's 2017 book, Promise Me, Dad, which shows that the book is a deeply moving memoir about the year that President Biden's son, Bo, died.
Without objection.
I also ask unanimous consent to enter page 97 of Mr. Herr's report, which says that President Biden's book is not known to contain classified information.
Without objection.
Finally, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a February 5th, 2024 letter from President Biden's counsel to Special Counsel Herr that clarifies that President Biden's 2017 book, quote, does not contain classified information, and there has never been any suggestion to the contrary, close quote.
Without objection. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Special Counsel Herr, for joining us here today to discuss your investigation regarding President Biden's mishandling of classified documents. This has become an issue of great interest to all Americans and, of course, to all of us here today. As is outlined in your report, despite the discovery of confidential and top-secret records located in the president's personal residence in Delaware, including in his garage, office, and basement, the department declined prosecution, and my colleagues' questions today have focused on the highlights from your report, specifically referring to President Biden's mental capacity, his willful disregard for the law as a private citizen, and how he would be perceived if presented to a jury of his peers. Dependent upon, and I'll use your words from the report, how this sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory handled and managed the storage of these confidential documents, the national security of the United States might have been put at great risk because of the president's behavior. And so one of the things we must consider today is how we can ensure that our national security will not be continually put at risk when under the leadership of the same well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. Since the release of the report, to your knowledge, has the Justice Department started to analyze a damage assessment of what may have been disclosed by these documents being mishandled and any ongoing national security risks from the inappropriate storage and retention of the documents?
Congresswoman, my understanding is that such a damage assessment is underway in coordination and cooperation with the members of the intelligence community.
And do you today, for us, have any information about the status of that investigation or how long it might take to conclude?
I do not, Congresswoman.
I'd like to turn your attention to a discussion of the distinction between proving the underlying elements of an offense and the concept of an obstruction of justice charge. Is it correct, Special Counsel Herr, that in some circumstances as a federal prosecutor, you may investigate the underlying offense, an underlying offense, choose not to charge that offense, but still have developed sufficient evidence to charge a defendant with obstruction of justice?
I think as a matter of law, theoretically, that could occur. I can't bring to mind specific examples of that happening, but I suppose that if that were to happen, it would be a more difficult case to try from a prosecutor's perspective.
The elements are distinct, though, are they not?
They are a distinct element.
And isn't it similar to a case where a federal prosecutor undergoes an investigation and ultimately doesn't pursue the original charge they were investigating, but during the course of the investigation concludes that a false statement was made to a federal law enforcement officer and brings a charge under 1001?
That could happen.
Yes. And again, there too, the elements would be different.
Correct.
And in reaching your final decision related to the declination or the recommendation to decline prosecution, you considered both the underlying elements of the offenses at issue and also the principles of federal prosecution. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, the principles of federal prosecution, those are things that may vary case to case. Is that right?
The determinations under the principles of federal prosecution are very fact and circumstance dependent.
But the elements of the criminal offense are not. Isn't that also correct?
Elements are defined by law, and they do not vary from case to case.
And thus, those elements of the underlying criminal offense would be exactly the same from one defendant to the next to the next. Isn't that right?
Yes.
So you would expect, would you not, that a prosecutor who was considering the underlying offenses that you were considering here would be looking at exactly the same elements and requirements of proof that you did on the underlying charges?
prosecutors assessing their cases under the same statutes must consider the same elements with respect to those statutes.
All right. Thank you, Special Counsel Herr. And then if we could turn back to the concept of those principles of federal prosecution. Those are the additional factors, aggravating or mitigating, that you might consider in ultimately reaching a charging decision here. Is that right?
They do include such things that are referred to as aggravating and mitigating circumstances.
There's one thing I want to go back to, though, to be clear. It's been said today that your report is tantamount to a total exoneration of President Biden. That's not correct, is it?
That is not correct.
All right. Thank you, sir. I yield the balance of my time to the chair.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from North Carolina.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Herr, also for your patience. You're almost to, 3.5 hours? So almost as much as Biden. Throughout your report, you repeatedly cite and credit a number of innocent explanations for the presence of classified materials at the president's home and other locations. Innocent explanations that you admit that you cannot refute. And I'd like to just focus on a few of them, and I'll give you citations. One of these explanations for the presence of classified documents is that a member of the president's staff maintained those documents when he was the vice president, and then mistakenly included them in sets of documents that were later sent to to locations such as the Penn Biden Center and the University of Delaware. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct, but if you have a specific page number for me, that would help me, Congressman.
We'll get you one. That would be great. You also found that another innocent explanation to be more likely than a criminal explanation for the presence of classified documents that were found at the Penn Biden Center and the University of Delaware. Is that correct?
Correct.
Great. And then let's talk about the documents in the president's garage. As you noted, a reasonable juror could conclude that the location of the documents, surrounded by household junk, is not a place where a person knowingly and intentionally stores classified documents that are critical to his legacy. Instead, it looks more like a place where a person stores classified documents that he's unaware of. That's on page 209 of your report, correct?
That is something that a reasonable juror could factor into his or her consideration of whether or not the president had criminal willful intent.
Great. And you also noted that President Biden was allowed to have classified documents in his home for 8 years as vice president, and then again when he was president, and that he also had layers of staff who were responsible for assembling, carrying, storing, and retrieving these types of classified documents.
Correct.
And because of these facts, you determined it was, quote, entirely possible that the president did not know he still had some of these documents in his home when his vice presidency ended in 2017. That's on page 215. Entirely possible.
Entirely possible.
Yeah. So that's the citation. I'm going to keep going because my time is running while you're looking. So you also cite the president's cooperation with your investigation as evidence that he did not have criminal intent. And I want to quote you here because this is important. You wrote, most significantly, Mr. Biden self-reported to the government that the Afghanistan documents were in his Delaware garage and consented to the search of his house to retrieve them and other classified materials. He also consented to searches of other locations, and later in the investigation, he participated in an interview with our office that lasted more than 5 hours and provided written answers to most of our written questions. Many will conclude that a president who knew he was illegally storing classified documents in his home would not have allowed such a search of his home to discover those documents and then answered the government's questions afterwards, page 210. And then you said that you expect this argument about the president's innocence to carry real force for many reasonable jurors, because in your words, reasonable jurors will conclude that Mr. Biden, a powerful, sophisticated person with access to the best advice in the world, would not have handed the government classified documents from his own home on a silver platter if he had willfully retained those documents for years. Just as a person who destroys evidence and lies often proves his guilt, a person who produces evidence and cooperates will seem by many to be innocent. Again, page 210. As you said in your report, it would be reasonable for a juror to reach that conclusion, and that a president advised by counsel would not have informed investigators of the presence of classified documents in his home or invited agents in the search of every nook and cranny of his home or other residence, or sat for an hours-long interview, or answered pages of written questions, all going to his full cooperation and his lack of criminal intent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Mr. Hur, we got 3 more we're going to do, and then we're going to take votes, and then we'll just have a couple more after that. So I'm going to start with the gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Yield to the chairman.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Hur, are you opposed to the U.S. Congress having access to the audio tapes of the people you interviewed during your investigation?
Chairman, I am not in a position to articulate an opinion one way or the other. That is not really up to me. I'm a former employee of the Department of Justice. I would refer you to the White House and DOJ leadership.
You're an accomplished lawyer. Is there any reason why we shouldn't, why the United States Congress shouldn't have access to the same information you had access to, and that was the basis of your decision?
Chairman, it is not for me to opine on what materials.
Well, the Justice Department released the transcripts the day of the hearing. It'd been nice if we'd had them in a more, I think, a better time for the committee to prepare for our questioning for you. They released them today. White House and the Justice Department released them today. It'd be nice if we actually had the audio tapes too. Again, is there any reason why you can see why the American people and their representatives in the United States Congress should not have access to those tapes?
Chairman, what I can tell you is that my assessment that went into my conclusions that I described in my report was based not solely on the transcript. It was based on all of the evidence, including the audio recordings.
Great point. And that's where I was going. So this was valuable evidence for you as the special counsel named to investigate this issue, valuable evidence for you to reach your conclusion and the statements you put in your report. And all I'm asking is, shouldn't the United States Congress have access to that same information?
Chairman, again, it is not for me to weigh into what information Congress should or should not have, but what I will tell you is that the audio recordings were part of the evidence, of course, that I considered in coming to my conclusions.
I will yield back to the gentleman from Kentucky and hopefully can yield to the gentleman from North Dakota.
Yield to the gentleman from North Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. Hur. In Chapter 8 of your book, or your report, you detail that Mr. Biden retained in his Delaware basement classified documents relating back to his time as a U.S. Senator in the 70s, correct?
Correct.
And even more Senate papers dating back to the 70s through 1991 were found in the University of Delaware, Morris Libraries, and in the Biden Senate Papers collection, correct?
Correct.
And even more Senate papers dating back to the 1970s and 1980s were found in Biden's Delaware garage.
I believe that's correct.
And quote, Mr. Biden had nearly 50 years experience dealing with classified information, including as a member of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, a member and chairman of the Senate Committee on Judiciary, a member and chairman of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, and Vice President of the United States. And that he was deeply familiar with the measures taken to safeguard classified information and the reasons for them, correct?
That language certainly sounds familiar, Congressman, but if you have a page citation for me, I can confirm.
And as Vice President, is it correct that in 2011, Mr. Biden received advice from his staff about the need to secure classified information in the form of notes?
Correct.
Including his first counsel, Cynthia Hogan?
Correct.
And he was advised in writing in 2011 by Hogan that classified notes must be obtained in secure safes and stored in secure facility.
Correct.
His second counsel, John McGail, also advised Biden that all of Mr. Biden's records, including his notes, would be sent to the National Archives, and Biden understood and accepted that, correct?
That's correct, with the exception that Mr. McGrail was Vice President Biden's final counsel, not his second one.
All right. And on his way out, Mr. Biden was also appraised of his obligations by the National Archives staff twice more that his classified notes should be secured in a SCIF.
That particular fact is not immediately coming to mind, Congressman, but if you have a page citation, I can confirm it for you.
Well, did Mr. Biden have 30 years experience handling this information? He received advice from at least 2 separate counsels, the National Archives staff. And he has demonstrated enough knowledge of the law to attack President Trump in public over the same exact issue in detail. This is where I get into this. I just have a problem with this. In your report and this testimony, a reasonable person would conclude that Mr. Biden knowingly retained national defense information and failed to deliver it to an appropriate government official, and that he knew his conduct was unlawful. And I think that's where we end up here, and that's what the point is. Over the last 3 election cycles, there's only been 3 people who have ran for president: Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, Donald Trump. All 3 of them have been accused of mishandling classified documents. Only one of them has been prosecuted. And that's what the American people see. That's what we see. We had Hillary Clinton, who ran a program called Bleach It on her server. They used hammers to destroy evidence. Joe Biden has a 50-year history of misplacing classified documents in numerous different places. All of these cases have the same underlying elements of the crime, the same fact patterns, and yet we only see one person being prosecuted. And with that, I yield back to the gentleman from Kentucky.
When time's expired, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The ranking member is recognized for unanimous consent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chairman, in light of what the chairman previously said, I ask unanimous consent that all transcribed interviews taken by the committee this year be made public.
There's an objection to that. The gentlelady from Missouri is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here, Mr. Hur. St. Louis and I are here today once again to focus on the real issues that affect our communities instead of partisan hit jobs. Let me start by saying that the potential mishandling of classified information is a serious issue, and I believe it was appropriate for the Attorney General to appoint both special counsels in the Biden and Trump cases. As my colleagues have pointed out, President Biden fully complied with the investigation conducted by Special Counsel Hur, who did not find evidence sufficient to warrant criminal charges. Despite this outcome, Republicans have used the special counsel's report to further their longstanding efforts to re-elect the former white supremacist in chief, Donald Trump, who faces 40 criminal charges related to the mishandling of classified documents, including obstruction of justice. While President Biden returned all of the classified material and complied with the special counsel's investigation, let's remind ourselves what Donald Trump has said and done. He refused to turn over the classified documents in his possession to the National Archives. He is on tape sharing documents he said he could have declassified when he was president. He wrongly claimed in an interview that the Presidential Records Act allows him to do whatever he wants, and he was allowed to do everything he did. He also said on his right-wing social media platform, quote, "I'm allowed to do all of this." He continues to admit to his possession of these documents on the campaign trail. So this hearing is not a good faith oversight effort. It is just the latest in a long line of dysfunctional and destructive actions taken by this Republican majority. They don't care about responsible governance or making people's lives better. They don't have an affirmative agenda. They are throwing whatever they can at the wall and hoping it sticks, and they have zero credibility to talk about mental acuity when they support Donald Trump. The same Donald Trump who mixes up Joe Biden and Barack Obama and Nikki Haley and Nancy Pelosi. The same Donald Trump who incorrectly pronounced the words Venezuela, respected, and United States. The same Donald Trump who calls January 6 defendants hostages. And the same Donald Trump who believed bleach injections would treat COVID-19. It is deeply hypocritical for anyone who champions this man for the presidency to talk about the mental acuity of anyone else. But this is nothing new. This has been a consistent pattern of the Republican majority in this Congress. From the sham impeachment investigation that has completely collapsed to the absurd impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas, Republicans have solely focused on destroying the incumbent president, destroying the Democratic Party, destroying progressive movements for social justice, all so that they can re-elect one of the worst presidents of all time. Now, it is well known that I have disagreements with President Biden on certain issues. My concerns are rooted in the desire to resolve policy matters and help him take better positions that save more lives. That's not what Republicans are doing. That's not what these investigations and attacks are about. They are trying everything they can to turn back the clock on our rights and our freedoms, and we cannot take the bait. Let's focus on policy. Let's focus on substance. Let's focus on saving and improving the lives of our constituents, not misusing the precious time and resources of this committee, not being dishonest just because it serves our political interests. We are better than that, and our country deserves better than all of this. I will continue to reject these absurd distractions from the investments we need in the communities that we represent. Let's focus on that instead of this irresponsible and easily repudiated Republican clown show. Thank you, and I